Following the First World War, the rate of female participation at the Olympic Games has been both a reflection of sexism in Australia and has also challenged and improved gender equality in Australian society, culturally, politically, and socially. In the decade following World War One, there were a noticeable lack of female athletes representing Australia at the Olympic Games. During the 1920 Olympic Games, Australia sent only one woman, Lily Beaupaire, to compete at Antwerp. Sport was generally considered to be the domain of men, according to Semyonov. Semyonov adds that the underwhelming increase reflected an Australian society with sexist cultural attitudes toward gender roles and stereotypes. As time progressed, the rate and freedom of female participation at the Olympic Games increased too. For example, at the 1928 Amsterdam Games, women were allowed to participate in the athletic and gymnastic events, and the rate of female participation increased by 10%. Unfortunately, however, the lack of female participation in high endurance events following 1928 was stifled by the Olympic Committee due to concerns that the harsh training might harm the chances of a healthy pregnancy. In Australia, female athletes were still hindered by harmful social attitudes based upon stereotypical sex roles. Here is a picture taken from The Age on August 9, 1932, the date following Claire Dennis's gold medal winning effort at the LA Games. Rosacea notes that Dennis was the first Australian woman to bring home a gold medal in 20 years. On The Age's page for women, Dennis's record-breaking effort receives a tiny portion of attention and is generally lost amongst home recipes and fashion advice. Here, The Age reflects the attitudes of a culture that mainly viewed women's pursuits as those that can be pursued from the home. The small portion of the page covering Dennis's feet is circled in red. Gender inequality continued to plague Australia during the 1940s, and this was reflected by the fact that Australian girls were often degraded for participating in sports and often suffered insults and name calling as a result. This was despite the fact that a woman, Shirley Strickland, was the most successful Australian Olympian at the 1948 Games. Although at times being a stark reflection of gender inequality in Australia, female participation in the Olympic Games has also transformed Australian society. Following the Olympic Committee's joint efforts to increase media coverage of female Olympians at the 2004 Games, there was an exponential growth for the amount of Australian girls participating in grassroots sports. The success of women at the Olympics and the growth in young Australian girls playing sports has also challenged sexist and discriminatory cultural barriers in Australia too. Historically, women in Australia have been socialised to participate in sports that have been deemed feminine, due to the concern that team sports, such as Aussie football, were considered by nature to be too rough for women. As the amount of women participating at the Olympics has increased, so has the amount of sports and events they can compete in. As a result, harmful gender role stereotypes in Australian sports have become less and less pervasive. Further, as more women have competed at the Games, they have collectively challenged sexist media coverage within sports in Australia. One study released from the University of Southern California has shown that women generally receive less than 50% of the same coverage that men receive in sports reporting. Consequently, in 2012, the Australian Sports Commission announced the installation of a gender equality unit to promote women's sport in the media and to promote gender equality in Australian society. Following Cathy Freeman's 1994 defining political protest at the Commonwealth Games, the gender equality faced by female Indigenous athletes has been alleviated to a small extent. Before Freeman's protest, Australia's Indigenous women had infinitely less access to sport. As a result of Freeman's protest, the Sydney Organising Committee made a conscious attempt at increasing Aboriginal representation in the 2000 Games and beyond. Following in the footsteps of Freeman, Aboriginal women have been able to turn to sports to fight for social representation, equality, and justice. Women at the Olympic Games have been able to use their platforms to fight for gender equality in Australia.